I want to be really clear to people listening. While I am enjoying a wonderful fractional career now, I want to be super clear that the first 6 months were constant rejections, watching my savings slip away, having to hold myself back from giving into temptation of going back to a salaried role.
Welcome back to 40-Minute Mentor, your pocket-sized career mentor on a mission to raise aspirations and inspire the next generation of category-defining founders. From purpose-led entrepreneurs to world-class investors and even Olympic champions, you'll learn firsthand from today's successful leaders on what it takes to be brilliant, all in just 40 minutes. Today, we are going to be talking about fractional careers. So for those of you that might not know what fractional roles are, fractional leadership roles often involve executives or senior leaders working for companies on a part-time basis without the longer-term commitment of a full-time role. JBM has been placing fractional leaders for many years, and it's a topic that has become increasingly popular, both with candidates who are exploring fractional careers, but also our clients who are looking to bring in fractional leaders in a more cost-effective and flexible way. So to talk about this fascinating topic, I'm joined by Fractional COO Neda Sahebelm and Carla Hoppe, founder and CEO of Wealthbrite. So in this episode, we'll hear first-hand stories from Neda about what it takes to go fractional, and also from Carla about her experience of hiring a fractional leader to supercharge growth. We are also hosting this episode in partnership with Operations Nation, who are long-standing friends of JBM. Operations Nation are a community-powered knowledge hub for operations leaders. We have a few of the Ops Nation community listening into today's recording, so a special welcome to everybody that's listening to this live. But the biggest welcome has to be for our guests, Neda and Carla. Thank you both so much for joining us today. How are you both doing?
Grand.
I'm very good.
Fantastic. Well, we are going to get you both warmed up with a few quick-fire questions. So please, we'll start with you, Carla, because this is the first time we've had the chance to chat. So I'll go first with you. And please, can you finish the following sentences after me? Question 1. I feel most energized when?
I think my answer is when I'm surrounded by passionate people, and it really could be about anything, right? You could be super passionate about Formula One, about athletics, about fractional roles. You could be passionate about any topic. If you're throwing out big energy, I'm loving it.
Love that. I'm here for that 100%. Neda, what about you?
Gosh, I am most energized when I think I'm at the helm of building really great teams. I generate so much satisfaction from putting a group of incredible people together and watching them play off each other's strengths, embrace diversity of thought, and get shit done. Are we allowed to say shit on this podcast? Get shit done.
Yes. Brilliant. 2 great answers, and they are very closely aligned to what I would say too. So thank you for that. Carla, my biggest failure to date is?
I think it's being afraid to move out of my comfort zone more quickly than I did. So I guess we'll come on to this story a little later in terms of my journey to becoming an entrepreneur. But I think at different points in my career, I've maybe hesitated before taking the leap. And looking back, I realized that I probably should have just been braver earlier, and I've probably lost a bit of time, but hey, I'm making up for it now.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, well, thank you for sharing. And that's probably a common one that a lot of people would agree to. So yeah, thanks. And I can't wait to hear more about the story. Neda, what's your biggest failure to date?
Mine is probably my relationship with my career up until this point. I have no regrets. I'm incredibly proud of how far I've come. But on reflection, I put so much of both my energy and my identity into other people's work. And I think one day when I woke up and kind of realized that, I was like, that's actually to the detriment of my personal relationships and even the one with myself. So I'm sure we'll get to that when I also talk about how I got onto my fractional journey. But the TLDR is it's taken physical and mental health wake-up calls to understand when you give 150% of yourself all the time, that becomes others' baseline for you. And so even 100% is subpar. So it's a failure I've reflected heavily on before starting Keshi, and still I make an active effort to manage as a business owner. And I'm sure many people can relate to it. So yeah.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. Final question. Good mentorship means to me?
I think it means knowing when to be the friend, the nerve giver, the challenger, or the inspirer. I think a good mentor can play many different roles, and being able to distinguish when the right time is to play those roles, I think, is what makes a really, really good mentor.
That's so true. That's great. Great answer. Neda, what about you?
I would say good mentorship genuinely has the mentee's best interest at heart. This moves people forward in a way that I think becomes cornerstone to their unique journey. I've had mentors in the past that mentored me for business benefit or as a means to their own progression. And it's not to say there's not plenty to be learned from that, but I've personally gained so much more from mentors who had no agenda other than seeing me succeed. And so I try to only take on mentees as well, where I can see myself moving them forward in that way versus any other sort of personal agenda.
Yeah, great answers. Wow, that's a really interesting insight into both of you already. I can't wait to dive into this conversation. But before we get on to all things fractional, let's hear a bit more about your careers to date and how you got to where you are today. So, Neda, we'll come to you first. Do you mind giving us a 60-second snapshot view of your CV?
Yeah, sure. I think a part of my story that's really important is I grew up working class because it has lent me to doing a lot more with very little as a mentality, and is no surprise why I'm a scale-obsessed fractional COO. But the 60-second walkthrough is business psychologist by trade. I started, like many people, in consulting for actually this key project, which was a woman-led European micro VC that wanted to expand into Silicon Valley, and it really gave me my first taste of tech and fundraising and just this new world that was emerging out of, well, no longer corporate. Ironically, then I went and worked at Fox and National Geographic, which is a corporate, in talent resourcing and development. And I stayed looking across Europe, Middle East, Africa. I stayed there until their big Disney acquisition. And after that, I was an early starter at EdTech startup Multiverse, where I had the pleasure of building and scaling teams across 6 rounds of funding and became a unicorn and all that fun jazz that you get at a hypergrowth startup. And now I run Keshti, where we partner with minority founders as fractional COO and scale advisor.
Amazing. Carla, let's hear your CV in 60 seconds, please.
Okay, so I guess I had a pretty traditional corporate career until fairly recently. So I actually trained as a lawyer. I'm also a first gen professional in my family. So yeah, qualified as a lawyer. If you'd asked me 15 years ago when I started out what I was going to do for the rest of my life, I was going to be a partner in a big law firm. I got two and a bit years into my journey as a corporate lawyer and decided, actually, this is really boring. But I had the opportunity to move to the US. So I moved out to the US and I was working for PwC at the time. And I actually switched at that point into their consulting group into tax and international tax. So I was very focused on finance, all things finance, tax, and deals kind of framework. So I worked with, kind of had a specialism looking at organizations and groups that were sort of scaling up on their way through to a listing. So helping teams that often didn't have a lot of internal resources within their finance function, help them navigate the complexities of what it meant to join some of the big boys up in the listed environment and what that meant for that internal controls perspective, but also the stories that they were actually telling when it came to finance and data around their financial performances. I came back to the UK and continued that path. Then I guess that's where the wobble started to happen, right? Because I did some really exciting little secondments. So I actually got to go work in the Shadow Treasury team in the UK here, advising some of the politicians on how to explain the complexities of the tax system in the UK to ordinary people, ordinary voters, helping them kind of digest that complexity and turn it into simple, everyday language. And that's something that I really pride myself on, and something that's kind of imbued in the thesis behind Wealthbrite, which is this stuff isn't actually so complicated that everybody can't understand it. It's just been presented in that way for such a long time. So I started sort of thinking that there was something more to what I could be doing around this kind of story behind money and finance, and kind of started looking at the fact that a lot of people didn't understand it. And it wasn't just people at the beginning of their career, right? When I left my career, I was actually at EY. I'd moved over there. I was on pathway to partnership there. And I guess in many ways, I kind of achieved my goal, right? I was on the route to becoming a partner at the Big Four. But actually, I realized that it wasn't the thing that was going to energize me, right? I wasn't surrounded by people that I was super passionate to be around. And actually, I knew at that stage that it wasn't the right thing to take that job, not just for me, but also potentially for somebody else that was more passionate about that job. So that's when I stepped out. And I guess I did an exercise which I'd really encourage people to do throughout their careers, which is I kind of went back and picked up on all the hot spots throughout my career when I was really genuinely passionate and thriving. And actually a thread that came out of it was me playing this kind of translator role, turning complex issues into simple, everyday, digestible content, but also a real passion behind unlocking, I guess, some of the taboos around understanding money and finance. So yeah, that's where the little seed for Wealthbrite was born. But it took me a while to get there. I actually worked part-time while I was building up the business. So again, I got bills to pay. And I wasn't able to just jump in. I don't come from a family background which could just suddenly like throw a bunch of capital at me. Or yes, I had savings and I have used my savings, but I worked part-time as the head of tax at an AI chip manufacturer called Graphcore here in the UK. So that was also really interesting because it gave me a really in-depth understanding of what it was like to work in a tech company that was on its Series E by the time I got there, and kind of the dynamics of a scale-up business. It was super awesome. But yeah, and here we are with Wealthbrite.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Sounds great. And I guess for those that don't know about Wealthbrite, do you mind giving a quick intro to the business and what it is you do and kind of where you're up to?
Yeah, sure. So I guess we're in ed tech. We started off very much looking at how can we help people build confidence, knowledge, and skills around understanding personal finances. Again, if you think about where we are, particularly in the UK at the minute, right, wealth inequality is on the rise, social mobility is going backwards, but actually crucially, the implications of poor financial literacy are really damaging in the world of business. So it's estimated to cost the British economy £20 billion a year. And that's because if you're worried about your money, you're showing up to work carrying stress, you're less productive, you're lacking motivation, and you might be taking leaves of absence because of the really serious health effects that could come from that kind of stress. So our job is really saying, how do we create a framework of learning that's relevant and contextual and practical for people? So we take it to the workplace because that's where you get your pay. That kind of is the thing that most people use to pay for their everyday lives and grow wealth from. And it's where they're most readily having access to financial benefits like insurance and pensions and lots of other wonderful benefits that unfortunately most people don't understand and aren't making the most of. So that's where we started, and we've just launched a new program, which is the corollary of personal finance, and that's helping people understand business finance. Because actually, if you want to be successful in your career, a lot of the time you need to understand, how does business actually work in practice? How does it make money? And what does it mean for your role?
Oh, it's such a great mission. Really, really exciting to hear. And see you come a long way in a short amount of time. Coming on to, I guess, the topic at hand, all things fractional, which is something at JBM we're very passionate about, having launched a proposition called SOS way back in lockdown, which is all around a more flexible talent offering for startup founders. Neda, you've made the move into fractional COO life in 2023. So I'd love to hear a bit more about why you went fractional and how did you make that initial transition work?
I did not know that I wanted to have a fractional career when I started off on this path. What I did know was I had been working for a number of very privileged leaders who have seen incredible things, have taught me how to do business right, but also had a lot of capital where I, on reflection, would not have done business that way, purely because I don't come from a background where I can think about making choices with excess capital. So I suppose for me, to be very honest, like I left my role, I took a sabbatical, and I had no idea what I was going to do next. I can appreciate that that is not the case for everybody. I think after sort of 10 years without a break, I was really keen to just take a little bit of time suppose mentioning I'm an expat as well. And so I've built this career in London, but originally being from LA, I've been far away from home. And I suppose the core people who sort of knew me before I became this like career oriented person. So that was really important. I took a break and I thought, what do I really enjoy? What do I value? And for me, there was this niggling gap of inequity because there's a stat out there that says 2% of VC funding goes to ethnic and gender minority founders. And obviously, I am a working class ethnic minority child of immigrants. And all of this was like, if I've been there, done that, and I've had the capital to make those mistakes, actually, how can I work with people who can't necessarily afford the capital to make those mistakes? And how can I help them build something sustainable and exponentially brilliant right the first time? So I suppose that's a good way to intro into what made me decide that this is what I wanted to focus on. And the fractional side is a little bit more nuanced, and I'm sure we will talk about that in more detail about what makes fractional so special and unique. So I will pause there for now.
Okay, no, thank you. That's really helpful to understand the story. And I guess would love to know what you have found most surprising and difficult about going fractional. Because there's no doubt when you're used to a more permanent full-time role, there's risks attached. It's probably pretty daunting. And I'd imagine there'll be people listening to this that kind of have heard a bit about the fractional movement and are excited by it. So I think it's important for us to talk about the harder parts of that transition, as well as we'll come on to the benefits. But yeah, we'd love to hear your experience.
Definitely. The most difficult part is starting a business. So I think that just relates to anyone who is a founder, let alone someone going into a fractional career. It's that bit about having to wear every hat yourself, from like selling, marketing, relationship building, finances, ops, admin. You are everything. And you also have to convince others that you can bring the same value fractionally, if not better, than you would full time. And that is an uphill battle. James, I remember a conversation we had when I was thinking of going fractional. And you were like, well, you could either not market yourself as that or market yourself as that, but you'll have to educate people along the way. So it's just, which one do you want to do? And I chose the latter. I was like, I want to be really clear to people listening. While I am enjoying a wonderful fractional career now, I want to be super clear that the first 6 months were constant rejections, watching my savings slip away, having to hold myself back from giving into temptation of going back to a salaried role. And I'm sure that resonates with any founder, but with the fractional as well, similar to other founders, you have to convince your user that you are adding value, even in this less traditional format. So that's been the most difficult, but I think it was worth it. The most surprising has been the type of client that has come my way. I'm very used to working in hyper growth environments where there's a lot that is not going well. And I expected my prospective clients to be coming to me with fires and being like, please put them out. So I was surprised to see less of these like painkiller clients and more vitamin clients instead. Carla is like a total vitamin client, someone who is honest about like what they know and what they don't know, and they really want to give their best shot the first time. So I've enjoyed working with people like Carla and other sort of vitamin founders who see this growth as a sustainable marathon rather than a bunch of exhausting sprints. And what I'm really happy to report back on is that the pace, the rigor, the quality of expectation, the bar is still the same. We just don't need to treat everything like A&E. And that is nice.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. What you said really resonates. I think there's a lot of people that will struggle or feel very uncomfortable with the more commercial aspects of having to start a fractional career, which is ultimately you are always having to sell to some extent, and you have to keep that pipeline moving, which I can understand might put very good people off. But actually, there's different ways to do it. Maybe we'll come on to talk about how you've evolved your offering. It's been amazing to see just the way you've lent into that and just the success. And we're about to come on and talk about that, with this partnership between the two of you. But before we do, let's talk about the benefits. What for you as a fractional COO, what have you really loved in this experience today? What have been the benefits you've seen?
I would say For me, it's really important to know that I'm adding value that transcends into any role that I've ever been in. And there's something really rewarding about being able to provide a been there, done that to founders who are going through a number of firsts, especially in this risk-averse fundraising climate. Like, nobody is throwing money at ideas anymore. You really can't afford to get it wrong the first time. And particularly if you come from a similar background to myself and Carla, where yes, we don't have families who can just throw excess capital. Like, we have to be really smart and clever about how we make the certain moves that we make. And so there is something nice about Carla's got an immense amount of strengths, and I learned so much from her. And there's certain things that I have done really poorly a number of times, and now I have the gift of hindsight that I can impart onto people that I work with, and that's been really nice. Another benefit I would say is being able to choose who you work with. So that lends itself nicely into this, setting up conditions in a way where you know you'll be able to provide your best versus what an employer prescribes of you. So whether that's working hours, where we meet, on which days we work together, the cadence of our meetings and our comms. You know, are you a morning person or afternoon person? Carla's a morning person. I'm an afternoon person. We've made it work. So I would say that's definitely a benefit, is being able to choose which founders you want to move forward. And when I met Carla, we have a cool meeting story, but there was something in me that was like, I really want to see this person succeed. And I hope, Carla, you feel the same. But we joined bands because we just genuinely were like, this is good people, good energy, and I want to see what she's doing be a household name in every country on the planet. So yeah.
Do you know what? It's very similar to how we look at our clients. I think when you have the privilege of being able to come in and run a COO search for an awesome founder who's building something really mission driven, something that you really align to, then instead of it being about just finding them somebody, it's like you're invested in their success. You are so invested in the company and you like feel a moral obligation to get it right. And I think there's something beautiful about that when you feel that way about the people you partner with. Coming to you then, Carla, why did you decide to hire Fractionally? And what would you say have been the advantages of having the brilliant Neda support you on a kind of fractional basis?
Yeah. Okay. So I guess maybe just to wind back, because I think whenever Neda and I met, so Neda actually came to an event that I ran, and I think we chatted a little bit. So she came to this event I ran for female founders, talking about managing money and time, two of your most precious resources, right? So I was taking on money, and my good friend Caitlin Rosario is taking on time, and how you deal with making that sort of, as efficient as possible without turning yourself into a crazy person. And I think at that stage, I had no intentions at all of hiring a fractional COO, right? It wasn't really on my radar, but we connected and we got chatting. And I think I was really honest with Neda when we first spoke. Actually, I had a couple of specific, jobs to be done that were very front of mind for me. But I also had some experiences previously where I had worked with people on sort of a part-time or consulting basis that hadn't really worked out for me. And I wouldn't say I was burned by it, because I was still open to the optionality of using people on a part-time basis. Like, frankly speaking, we are, fingers crossed, end of this month, closing our pre-seed round, but I've bootstrapped the business to date. And so from a cost perspective, I couldn't afford to bring somebody on full time that could give me their level of expertise that I felt like I needed, right? So I felt like, in principle, using somebody in a sort of part-time fractional consultant type arrangement was the right way to go, right? But I think the thing that Neda and I did, or locked into really, really quickly, was just, we've been extremely honest with each other about what it is that we're trying to do, how it is we want to work, and therefore what is possible within a fractional kind of relationship. I think that's worked really well for both of us, because for me, it's given me confidence. I know exactly what I'm getting. And from a cost benefit perspective, if I put my purest founder hat on, I say the jobs I have to do are set the strategic vision for the company, don't run out of money, and build a great team, right? And if I'm focused on number two for a minute, Number two is always front of my mind. And so I have to make sure that wherever I deploy my capital, because it is so precious, I know I'm going to get something really awesome back, right? And I think the thing I've learned with Neda is there's no real substitute for just spending time getting to know that person and making sure that that relationship is going to work for both parties. And again, like finding people who you can instantly click and be honest with. I think honesty is such a big feature in a successful fractional relationship. If I reflect back on some of my previous experiences where I've maybe worked with people, consultant or contracting arrangements, probably if I ask myself what went wrong there, I think it's because I wasn't being honest enough about what I needed or exactly like what my expectations were or the cadence at which I kind of expected us to work, right? And that led to then there being disappointment or a feeling that we weren't quite speaking on the same page, right? Whereas what's worked really well and the benefit to me then of working fractionally with Neda has been we are both extremely clear on our scope of work. And the nice thing is that we've built a lot of trust very quickly because we've had that clarity and we've been able to meet and exceed expectations in that very distinct scope of work. And what that's led to is that actually we've then got both more comfortable asking each other for extras, I guess, which are strictly speaking outside the scope. But then we've got to a stage where Neda is part of the team. I don't think of her as fractional COO, that this fractional language isn't really in my lexicon when I talk about Neda. When I talk about the team at Wealthbrite, we're four. And the four are me, our other full-time member of staff, and two people that are actually technically fractional and part-time. But I don't think of them like that. And I think that's the beauty of what we've been able to create just by having that very honest dialogue up front.
Love that. And that's exactly how we feel at JBM. We have a number of fractional colleagues and they are very much part of the team. That shows that it's really working and you want both sides to feel that way. And clearly in this instance, that is the case. And that's a brilliant thing. It shows it's really working. How would you say your expectations are different when it comes to hiring a fractional leader as opposed to a full-time COO, Carla?
That's a good question. I think, to be truthful, now I've worked with Neda, I think my expectations would be extremely high for a full-time member of staff because, honestly speaking, I know Neda said this earlier, but the way we work is just so efficient. And I think what's nice about the way we've both managed to set up our working time together is that we have time to just chit chat and we know each other and have gotten to know each other as people. But when we get together and we're doing something, it's we can get things done so efficiently that honestly, I kind of really recognize that Neda probably does for me. I can't really imagine what more a full-time person would do is my honest perspective right now, right? I think the beauty of the model that we've created is that Neda has freed up a huge part of my brain to be able to focus on some product-specific exercises, some BD, and I've been fundraising. So that has taken up a huge amount of my time, right? And I think the benefit of what Neda's brought to the table is the ability for me to switch off the part of my brain that would have otherwise been worrying about the ops or the team management, team admin. The scope of work we originally agreed on was that Neda was to help me hire my superstar salesperson, which we've done. We've brought her on board. And actually, there was so much where that sort of work stream was completely clashing with the fundraising work stream. And if I hadn't had Neda to take that pain away from me, I think I would have really struggled to get through the last few months. So when I think about what a full-time COO would be doing, I think, first of all, the team would have to scale up, but I would expect them to be doing that same thing, right? It's that me not having to think about some of that stuff. So it frees me up to get on with growing the business and growing the team.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Neda, coming to you in terms of how you define the scope of your fractional COO role as a kind of candidate coming in. We'd love to hear your perspectives on that. And then I'd love to hear how Carla thought about it as well and how because it seems like whatever you both thought, you've kind of come to this very unified way of thinking and it's a really clearly defined brief. But yeah, would love to hear your thoughts.
So I'll be transparent and say, because Carla knows too, that I made my first real rookie mistake with her, which was she came to me with a very clear pain point. And I was like, that's really easy. You don't need me for that. Like, you could probably just bash one out yourself. You'll be fine. And it was really a wake-up call that I'm glad happened, because I realized that until she gets rid of this imminent pain point, I can't talk to her about all the great things that she can do with Wealthbrite in 2, 3 months, 4 months, 6 months time. Like, she needs this pain point today removed. And because it's something that was really easy for me, I was like, why don't we just grab a coffee and like do it in 30 minutes? So what we did together was the job description for this amazing salesperson, which it's not that it's necessarily difficult, but it is really easy when you've made 1,000 of them. Like, it's something I can structure in my sleep. So we sat, we bashed it out, and Carla was like, great, how do we do this for like more than just 30 minutes? And that started our conversation. But to answer the question of how did we scope this, how do I approach this as a fractional COO, knowing your USP is really important. So for me, it's scaling all things people and doing more with less, whether that looks like designing a sustainable org, budgeting a headcount, getting the right people in the right roles with the right resources, creating the environments that encourage their progression. It really has to depend on what the thing you can offer is. And for Carla, this was about making the most of her funding to build an operationally efficient and sustainable business with the top 1% of talent out there, because she is a top 1% founder and has a very high bar. So I would say the nature of my work as both a fractional COO and scale advisor is about founders having fun scaling without the chaos. And I use this line a lot. If anyone reads any of my LinkedIn posts, you'll see I talk about this, bang on about it so much, but scale gets chaotic because we confuse it with growth. And that is not what I, as a fractional COO, offer. It's really important to say that. With growth, you need to do more to get more. And that often takes the form of expensive tools or headcount. I am not that person. For me, chaos free is finding opportunities to do more with less. The difference of reaching 100 users or 10,000 users in the same input, for example. So I'm really clear when someone comes to me and says, I've got this thing I want to do. We want to maximize revenue. We want to, great. But my approach is I help you identify and maximize opportunities for you and your team to do that with less. And if you are looking to have these like really aggressive growth goals and targets and lots of like capital going out for the chance of exponential, that's not my default approach. And so if someone does come to me and says, how can we work together? The TLDR is like, know what your key USP is that you can offer and know the way in which you do it. And my way is different from another fractional COO. It's just about finding that balance and match.
For founders who might be thinking about using fractional talent in this way, I think what's really beneficial to someone like me who isn't like a first-time founder, everything is brand new for me, right? So a lot of this is me figuring it out for the first time. And actually, I think what's been really helpful to me in order to, I guess, like solidify in my mind the different roles in the business and help me clarify what the org structure in our business looks like and what the art of the possible is from a sort of scaling business is Neda's willingness to be super crystal clear with me about what we are focused on or what we aren't focused on, right? Or presenting to me the trade-offs, because sometimes I'll throw something out at her and I'll be like, hey, can you do this? And she's like, absolutely, I can. But just to be clear, if I do this, do you also want me to prioritize this? Which one of these two things is most important to you right now? And then I always respect that because it forces me to pause and get clear in my own mind about what my priorities actually are with the team that I have in front of me. And sometimes the answer has been, oh yeah, good, fair point. That's not really a priority. Never mind, ignore me. But then other times we've made a decision to do something. And I think having a fractional leader who is very clear about their USP and about their ways of working is also incredibly helpful for your founders, because some of us are really, this is our first time doing this. And we also need guidance and support in terms of managing that relationship efficiently.
Totally. No, great points. Thank you both for sharing. Just coming to you in terms of what the typical day-to-day looks like as a fractional COO, the work you do supporting businesses and especially Wealthbrite as the fractional COO. We've talked a lot about how you're helping with prioritization, you're sort of nailing key, like big challenges to kind of help the business move forward. But specifically, are there any things you can share to kind of bring to life almost what a day-to-day would look like as a fractional COO?
Yeah. I would say it varies, which is not surprising for anyone to hear. It looks different across my varied clients. I'll focus on Carla's because I think, as she said, we started with a very clear scope. And then as we built trust, it was like, actually, what else could we do together now that the other one is winding down? So it started out with, we want to find an incredible founding account exec to work in Carla's team. This is a unicorn role for anyone who's hired for it, finding like the right level of sales. Because my reflection, having worked with and being friends with a lot of founders, is when they usually want their first go-to-market person, they either go too low or too high in seniority. And if you take a really senior person, then they're going to expect typically a budget, and they're going to want to build out a team and functions. It's been a long time since they've done the doing, and fair enough to where they're at in their career. That's not the first thing at the top of mind. If you take somebody too junior, it is really lovely, and there is a time to build somebody up with you. But if you're in the middle of a fundraise and you're playing every single role and wearing every single hat, you don't have the headspace or the bandwidth to do that. And business development, lead generation, these need seasoned hands, but not somebody who's going to come in and be like, I need to build out a whole region. So unicorn hire, I was like, Carla, I commit to helping you get this person in time, and we're going to do it right the first time, and they're going to be the top 1%. And so we built a job spec, we budgeted the headcount, we put it out there, used LinkedIn Recruiter, got to teach Carla how to use LinkedIn Recruiter, one of my favorite tools, and set up a whole interview process, like a really, really good one. We had about 200 plus applicants, and we found our person. And it didn't stop there. Then it was like, how do we give them the right compelling offer? How do we give them the right amount of equity? How do we set them up for an incredible onboarding that makes them feel informed without being overwhelmed, but also part of the team? How do they get equipped to hit the ground running? Carla, how are you going to have one-to-ones with them? How are you going to check their performance in the first month? How are you going to keep track of that? What kind of manager do you want to be? There's so much that went into it. But now that that person is settled, the scope of our relationship has changed a little bit. You know, Carla's funding round is coming to an end. How are we going to maximize and utilize that? How are we going to set OKRs that are strategic? My role now becomes, how do we set that? And also, how do I hold the team to account to be achieving it and stay iterative? You know, if they need resources, how can I help facilitate that? So that Carla can continue focusing on being the external face of Wealthbrite, as she should be, while I keep the house in order. So I would say the relationship could start as something to build trust. It could be very specific, but there's been beauty in watching it evolve into something a bit more strategic as our time together has progressed on.
I love that. And Carla, you mentioned how you see Neda as part of the team, completely. So I guess for others that might be listening to this thinking, okay, I'm going to hire somebody fractional and I want them to have that same feeling. How do you balance the fractional and permanent members of staff and ensure that everyone feels like one? I would love to hear any tips or tricks you have there.
Yeah, well, I guess, first thing to say is that at Wealthbrite, we operate a hybrid working model anyway, which I guess is pretty much the norm these days. So even for full-time members of staff, of which there are two of us, we don't always work. We're sometimes working at home, right? But then what we have set up is that one day a week, the whole team gets together. So Neda works one day a week for Wealthbrite. And whereas when we were recruiting for Jenna to join the team, in order to make that as powerful as possible, given the fact that she was running a recruitment campaign with me, we kind of spread that day of time over the week because we couldn't have candidates contact us and then not hear back from us for like 4 days. But now she's actually on board, and we're switching a little bit the focus of how Neda kind of supports the team and kind of really owns that operational side of what we're doing and delivering, it makes more sense for us to be able to bring the team together on one day. That day is used for all of our one-to-ones. It's a very energy intensive day. It's a lot of fun, but I'm sure everybody goes home quite tired at the end of it because it's like back-to-back meetings. But what that means is we get to like have a really long period of time together where we can kind of catch up on all of the questions that we might need to have answered. We have all the one-to-ones so we can get into the detail of the OKRs and how people are performing against objectives. And we've got, opportunities for sort of team stand-ups to do different things. And so that's one way. I think the other things to say is that like any team, we also want to have some downtime, right? We want to have a bit of fun. So we do try and find those moments of balance as well. So like next week, we've got our H2 offsite planning day. And, first half of the day is going to be, intense period of work. We're really going to crank out what the team's OKRs on a more specific level look like. But then we're spending the rest of the afternoon having a bit of fun, right? We're going to go out for some food. We're going to go and do sort of team activities together. And I think it's important that whenever I'm doing those types of things, everybody's involved. It doesn't matter if you're full-time or you're not full-time. Everybody gets to come along to those things because that's how we generate those really, really positive relationships. And yeah, I think that's so much part of it. And then there's also just like using the tech stack that you've got to make the working process as collaborative as possible. So whether that's Notion or Slack or G Drive, we always work in a way where everybody has eyes on the specific project where there's more than one of us involved.
Got it. Thank you so much, Carla. Well, we've had some great questions come in from our audience from the Ops Nation community, and I'd love to get your thoughts on some of them before we get to our wrap-up questions. So, Ned, I'm going to start with you. What experience do you need before being able to go fractional? So I guess this is probably somebody that's thinking perhaps this is the future direction of travel. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm going to tie it back to what I said before, which is you should know what your key USPs are. For me personally, it was not doing many things right before I felt like I could advise others. It was doing many things wrong to be able to help others get it right, because I have seen the aftermath of my own novice decisions. And so I felt comfortable bringing the value of hindsight as my experience. The other thing I would say is I wouldn't recommend bullshitting your way through a fractional career. If you haven't done something before and you don't have a massive budget to get others to help externally, whether that's subcontractors or other people who can, do X, Y, Z, just remember your reputation is on the line. It does help to be honest with clients about what you can and can't deliver to maintain that trust. As a fractional COO, you will get someone come to you and say, do you know how to do this? And I know that that's more of a CFO job or a CMO job. And personally, I would suggest not bullshitting your way to the answer because it just is a reflection of you.
So true. The sort of phrase I typically use is it takes years to build a reputation and minutes to destroy it. So you really need to be honest. I think it's the best way. But the beauty of that is if you are clear and you deliver what you promised, then a word travels fast. And I think that's one of the things, especially if you're a little bit nervous on the business development side of things, which you'll have to do if you are, run your own business or, you go fractional, then actually to help yourself, it's really about, setting clear expectations, delivering on those, and then let that ripple effect kick in terms of, organic growth, which is exactly how JMBM is growing as well. And just final question to you, Neda, and then we'll come to Carla. There's somebody is sending a question. I want to move from being a permanent COO to a fractional COO. How do I find companies that might be open to hiring fractionally? So we'd love just to quickly get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I will do the short version of what I've kind of just said, which is start by asking founders the questions you need the answers to, because it really helps with your sales pitch. For me, those questions were what keeps you up at night and what scares you about having a COO in a fractional capacity. Because once I understood their fears and their pains, then I could think about how I would address them with my own offering. And also, there's a lot of value in letting founders just talk and listening to them. I don't know if they often get enough space for that. And if you can provide that, that's just a nice thing to do. Second, start with the relationships you've already established to test and build some trust. And third, be prepared to educate others The more you understand about a company and what their pain points are, the more you can offer how you would fill in. And honestly, most companies are not worried about giving you a small test of things to do. The rejection often comes from they don't know what they don't know. And so if you can get your foot in the door to just test one thing, as a fractional COO, at least for me, I've seen a lot of things. So if I see one small thing, I can probably see other things, and then it becomes a conversation.
Totally. Yeah, great answer. And one thing I'd add is just on the personal brand side, it's tell the world what you're doing and what you're all about, and create content that shows your expertise. Come on to podcasts like this, do that, because Neda's great at it. And it really does have that very quickly ripple effect, an echo chamber of the right sorts of people start to see. And they're like, oh, I haven't thought about that. And I really should have a conversation. It really does make a difference. And in this day and age where there is a lot of people looking to do this, so you need to cut through the noise and really make sure you've optimized your online presence to kind of make sure you're helping yourself, especially if it's the first time you sort of put yourself out there.
I started posting on LinkedIn and it was an echo chamber. Like I didn't get many likes or engagement at the beginning. I used it to build relationships. And now I will say to anyone who is thinking about it, it has been where most of my leads come. And it's not necessarily from a post where someone's just like, oh, I really relate to this. How do we work together? It's someone that I've met or built a relationship with and then spewed out a couple posts just showing credibility of I know what I'm talking about. And then that has led to a conversation. So don't be afraid to put yourself out there. It was a good point, James.
For sure. Thank you. And Carla, just coming to you, what are the considerations to keep in mind when thinking about hiring fractionally?
I think we've touched on a few of them here. So I think making sure as the founder that you at least have some clarity around why it is you think you need this person for this particular role. I think the exercise of articulating the jobs to be done and perhaps also articulating like, what is it about this task, this job that either brings you joy, but you still need to take it off your plate, or you absolutely hate, and therefore that's why you want it off your plate, right? Because I think that's a model that Neda and I use, and I think it's really helpful because it starts to then really distill down exactly what it is you want this person to be doing for you, which is a really good place to start, because from that clarity of scope, you can then design like the ways of working. It'll also help you price it up. And then all those sort of decisions can fall off that. So that would be my tip.
Great advice, Carla. Thank you. And final question before I wrap up to you, Carla. What advice do you have when it comes to convincing skeptics about the role of fractional or the value of fractional hires?
Well, I mean, I think what Neda and I have done together is proof that it can be very, very successful. I will say, however, that I think it is as much about the relationship that you have with the person that you're working with as it is the task that's being done. And I think that really, in my experience thus far, I think getting the relationship right and working with somebody that understands what you're building for, has, can bring their own passion to what it is that you're building for is super important. At the end of the day, this person is part of like what is essentially your founding team at this really critical time of my business. So if Neda wasn't excited about the mission of Wealthbrite to improve financial literacy across people, then I feel like it wouldn't necessarily have the same kind of gel, right? Because I need her to be great at the operational side, but also have that kind of like drive to see my business succeed as much as her own, right? And I think she shared earlier that that's one of the things that she really does bring to the table. So I think for the skeptics out there, I think it would be just like to say, make sure you're spending the time to find the right person. And I think once you do, then you really can have a lot of success with it.
Totally. And if anyone is listening to this that is skeptical, I'm really happy to have a call with anyone. We've placed a lot of fractional leaders and we've seen the exponential impact they have had for many founders. And I do think it doesn't mean that every single hire you have to make has to be fractional. It's not going to be relevant for everything. But particularly if you're early stage, you need some help, you need some help. I can really vouch for. And I think this conversation is a great example of how when it goes right and you really think about it really carefully, it can be hugely impactful. So yeah, I'm here for this. I just want to say a massive thank you to you both for sharing your experience.
Before we end, I just want to add one line there because it hasn't been said, but people should also know, skeptics should know that there's incredible value to having someone with other eyes on the market, learning how other businesses are operating firsthand, because we're typically often in a bubble, and having someone who is still connected to your business, but less in that bubble. Fractionals are incredibly well connected to founders and other fractional talent. So we know where there's other eyes. We know what's going on. We know how other businesses are doing things, and we know where to plug it. So that hasn't been mentioned yet, and I think is a really great way to alleviate some of the skeptics' concerns.
Totally. And if you can hire somebody exceptional that you wouldn't necessarily be able to afford full time, or maybe even have access to, not only will you get huge value from their expertise, but also they become talent magnets. And that's the other thing, I think, for the rest of your business, to be able to say you have this sort of exceptional person that's come from this brand, that attracts people. That is powerful when it comes to an investor story as well, and great for just brand in general, because great founders are able to attract great talent. And that's something I think we should be really mindful of, and use Fractional to one's advantage on that point. Two final wrap-up questions, both. This is 40-Minute Mentor, so I have to ask, if you could be mentored by anyone, dead or alive, who would it be and why? And I'll ask you first, Carla.
Well, okay, so I did think about this before, and I think my answer right now would be Scott Galloway. So he's the professor of marketing at Stern Business School. He's also one of the podcast hosts of a great podcast called Pivot. If anybody doesn't listen already, it's a fantastic way to keep up to date with tech and business news. But I think he's got a wealth of expertise, not just around building successful businesses. He's done that 7 times over, but just the power of marketing and brand and what that can do in terms of building profile and building companies successfully. And he's got a really keen eye on how to become economically successful as a founder. And I think thinking strategically about the way in which you build for multiple revenue streams as a business owner. I love his thoughts on that stuff. And yeah, if I could have him as a mentor, I would snap it up. He apparently is living in London now, so you never know. I might get lucky.
Awesome. If you're listening to this, Scott, reach out. Neda, what about you?
Mine is Christian Amanpour since I was a kid. She's just at the center of all the tea, man. And she has a way of composing herself so well. She's an idol. So I'm keep it short and sweet. She travels the world. She gets things done. She has a way of speaking to anybody in a really impressive decorum. She's a star.
Love that.
And she's part Iranian. That's really important to say too.
Oh, wow. There we go. Extra reason. Bonus points. And Neda, I'll come to you. What's the one piece of advice, career advice, that you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I would say celebrate the small wins and remember to check in with yourself. 2 things I don't do all that often. I have had clients tell me that I don't charge enough. Some tell me I've charged too much. But before that, I couldn't even get to a proposal stage with clients. So it's really important to remember how far you've come. You will be bad at many things before you're good at them. A close coach of mine once called it micro incompetencies, and you will have a lot of them as you start your journey. But ultimately, you need to build something you're proud of, and it can be easy to forget how much you have done in pursuit of that if you're fully focused on the destination. So carve out time and celebrate the small wins.
Love that. Totally agree. And Carla, same question.
My one is make networking personal, not transactional. I think that so often, particularly even with like what we're seeing around LinkedIn and the use of AI and a lot of like responses and the way people are engaging in some of these platforms and networking spaces, is it's almost just like the transactional give and take is for the like or for the follow, right? But actually, I think where networking really comes into its own is when you really invest in building meaningful personal relationships. And whilst those can start in an online forum, really there's no substitute for like, even if it's hopping on a call, getting to know somebody as an individual, because I really believe in the power of your network.
Totally. Yes, your network is your net worth. And I think you can only build that network if you take the time to build genuine, authentic relationships. And I couldn't agree more. And that is at the very heart of JVM's business. And actually, the 40-Minute Mentor podcast, to be honest with you, it's all about like meaningful connections. So thank you so much, both of you. This is a topic I am very passionate about. It's been a real joy and a pleasure. So thank you both so much. I hope your fractional partnership continues to blossom and that the business, Carla, goes from strength to strength. You're a great team. And thank you for sharing your experience with us today.
Thanks so much, James.
Thank you for having us, James.
Thanks a lot. Take care.
Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. I really hope that you found it useful and inspiring. If we have left any questions unanswered, or if you have any feedback or guest recommendations for future series, then please make sure you get in touch on info@jbmc.co.uk. I often get asked by listeners how you can help us spread the word about 40 Minute Mentor. There are two simple ways you can help. Firstly, share this episode on your preferred social media platform, and LinkedIn is probably where I'm most likely to see it. And you can also leave us a review on either Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Every share on social media and review left on the podcast platforms really helps us to get 40 Minute Mentor in front of new audiences and share the power of mentorship even further. Thank you so much for your ongoing support, and I look forward to seeing you again next Wednesday for even more pocket-sized mentorship.